Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect. I am your host, Dr. Zach Groeschel. Today I'm very excited to be speaking with Scott Hill, the Superintendent of Evergreen School Division in Manitoba, Canada. We will be talking about evidence-informed school leadership, including the shift that Evergreen has made towards a science of reading-based curriculum and the decision to embed Rosenshine's principles of instruction into their strategic plan. If you're a school leader or a decision maker yourself, I hope you listen to this episode closely. Scott and Evergreen are doing fantastic things in this space, and I was totally honored he agreed to come on Progressively Incorrect to lend his expertise. This podcast is brought to you by John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education. This week, I'd like to share a book that I talked about last week with Hailey Hughes titled Responsive Coaching: Evidence-Informed Instructional Coaching that Works for Every Teacher in Your School. Josh Goodrich is the author, and he and his company Step Lab are changing the world of instructional coaching through a practical, efficient, and accountable approach that just makes so much freaking sense. This is one of the best books I've read in 2024, you guys, and I highly recommend you check it out. Do you enjoy the topics that I talk about on this podcast and want to see them make their way into your school? Consider hiring me to lead interactive workshops on the science of learning and instruction. Please message me through my contact page on my website, which is linked in the show notes of this episode for more details. Now, without further ado, let's roll the tape of my discussion with one of the most forward-thinking superintendents in education today, Scott Hill. Hello, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Zach. Happy to be here. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm calling in from Evergreen headquarters. Where are you calling in from?
I think my Evergreen is the headquarters, Zach. I'm a whole district or division out here. So yeah. And I should say that I am um, I am here in Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 territory and the homeland of the Red River Métis. And so that's a land acknowledgement that is part of our work here in Manitoba around truth and reconciliation with Indigenous people. So I want to acknowledge that too.
Wonderful. And clearly for international listeners, you are calling in from Canada.
Yes, Manitoba, Canada. We're about an hour north of Winnipeg here in Evergreen School Division.
Well, we're going to be talking about your work because I became familiar with it recently, and for me, I needed to have you on because leadership is such an important part of this type of work that I'm interested in. Grassroots stuff is great, but we have to have some sort of top down leadership as well. So let's start with this question. What is it you see in Evergreen that makes it stand out? It makes it important to talk about at this juncture.
Well, I think a few things, some of which are more deliberate than others, which some of which is sort of accidental or just contextual. One is we're a school division that's, I think, the right size. We're pretty small, and I think that would be especially true in comparison to how large school districts can be in the United States or even other provinces here in Canada. But I think our size makes it possible for us to achieve system change in ways that larger organizations can't. So that's something that stands out for me. We've got a very supportive board of trustees in our school division as well, and so it kind of sets up a scenario, and you'll know this from your work in schools, that teachers can do their best work when they feel like the principal has their back, so to speak. Principals can do their best work when they feel like the superintendent has their back. And a superintendent can do their best work when they know that the board has their back. So our board is really supportive, and that I think that's a really important feature to point out. Another is it happens to be true, and some of this is deliberate, and some of this is really good fortune, that we have some really great people who are in the right positions, sort of at the right time, for us to be doing the work that we do, and that includes clinicians and divisional support people, as well as our principals and teachers. So those for sure stand out for me, that are kind of contextual. And then in terms of like our priority and focus areas, I think what might stand out is our work in reading instruction and intervention. So we're pretty early out of the gate here in terms of reading instruction that's built around structured literacy, and an intervention program here that is a departure from the former reading recovery. We also have an instructional emphasis in our school division that is, I guess it turns out, based on and complementary to or commensurate with Rosenshine's principles of instruction. Um, we kind of landed, or we kind of found our way there through some work that we were already doing. And then I think instructional leadership is a big focus for us as well here in Evergreen, through our principals, of course, but also divisional staff. And we're looking at doing some more formal work kind of through instructional coaching as well. So those are things that stand out for me in Evergreen. I'm really grateful to be here, and it's a great place to work. And it's a great place for students to learn and teachers to teach.
Well, let's talk about that reading initiative that you started. You sort of a pioneer in this. Like, Sold a Story comes out just a few years ago, and school districts are scrambling, but some are still kind of clinging to the old ways, I think, or are maybe SOR light, I guess. I guess I would call them. How about you talk about your new kind of reading scope and sequence? Like, why was that decision made to go and start, that initiative, and how is it playing out?
Well, I think for us, it started a few years ago, maybe a few things happening at the same time. So, um, one was I can just share a story. I remember being here in the board office, and my learning coordinator telling me about early years instructional practice in our school division. And I'm not early years trained. My background is as a high school teacher. And so, not knowing very much about it, I remember hearing that, we're telling teachers and we're telling parents that sounding out words is not a good reading strategy. And I said, what? I said, what? um, I didn't even know what that could mean. I think that my response was something like, what do we think the letters are for? The letters go left to right and make sounds. How could it not be that that's supposed to be instructive about how we read words? So that was kind of part of the genesis of it for me, was just being kind of baffled to learn that what was termed balanced literacy still had something, I guess, of a pretty significant weight around whole language, if you like. And these are things, as I said, not being early years trained, I was kind of learning for the first time. I assumed sounding out words was part of what we did in every classroom in, I guess, the Western world or the English speaking world. And so I was a bit surprised by that. Around the same time, one of the neighboring provinces here in Canada, Ontario, next to Manitoba, where we are. In Ontario, they had a human rights inquiry around the right to read. And so they were looking at, what does reading instruction look like in our schools, and what does it mean for students who struggle to learn to read, students with dyslexia, et cetera. And so we could begin to see in our attentiveness to that, and in our own sort of realizations here in our school division, that there was more research to do. We had a teacher in one of our schools also who became keenly interested in Orton Gillingham training and Orton Gillingham instructional practice. And so that was another kind of part of this constellation of stuff happening around the same time. And then the more we learned and the more we researched, the more we started to see, there's a different and better way to do some of this. And so we just felt compelled to act. Sorry, we felt compelled to act. And there's a similar human rights inquiry being undertaken here in our province of Manitoba, but that's a bit slow going, and we don't have the results yet. But we weren't going to wait. We weren't going to wait for that. We just wanted to get to it. So that's a bit of the background. And then as for how it's going, I mean, I think one of the most compelling experiences that I've had this year was to be in a kindergarten classroom. I was standing in a kindergarten classroom on December 6th and of this school year. And we have part-time kindergarten. So the kids come for full days, but 3 days a week. Um, and I was watching this teacher um, providing explicit and direct instruction around literacy. And I was observing that our kids were reading. They were reading CVC words within their first few months of being in kindergarten. And I was recalling that when we were starting on our journey around structured literacy, I'd heard some people say things about what's developmentally appropriate for kids and at what ages. And I never really know what people are necessarily. I'm not sure if people are always saying the same thing when they use a phrase like developmentally appropriate. I'm not sure if maybe they mean possible, if it's developmentally possible. But I was experiencing a classroom that was full of joy and full of learning. And this was a diverse classroom where there are challenges, but kids were learning to read, and I just felt it was really just a great experience to see that what I feel like some people were saying was not possible was indeed possible. It was so compelling. Um, it's so compelling for us, the gains that we're making, that our board has decided to support full-time kindergarten next year. And so we're moving to full day kindergarten 5 days of the week because we know what we can achieve when we have that much more time and we have explicit and direct instruction for early reading. And then to go along with our instructional practice that's in keeping with our scope and sequence, which we developed in collaboration with our teachers, but also in a partnership with we've got a partnership with Memorial University in Newfoundland, another one of our provinces here in Canada. And so we're working with somebody there. Her name's Jean Sinclair, and has helped us to work out that scope and sequence. And so that's been a real powerful support to us. And then because we were replacing reading recovery as our intervention strategy, we spent about a year before we fully said goodbye to reading recovery, working on the development of an intervention model that would have some of the features of reading recovery that we appreciated, structural features around rigor and oversight. And our speech language pathologist has really helped to flesh that out. And so now we have this rigorous reading intervention process here that's basically homegrown, and has shown a lot of gains. And yeah, so it's going well. I mean, one of the things that I could share is the story of our intervention teachers contact our SLP to help problem solve what they're experiencing working with kids and trying to close those gaps. And recently, one of those problem solving calls went a little bit like this. I've got 5 kids who were well below in September, and they're in a reading intervention group with me, and it's now spring. What do? They're all at benchmark. And it's just, I think the answer is celebrate. Pat yourself on the back, teacher. Like, what a great job. And so it's just been amazing. I mean, we had a parent come and present to our school board actually to talk about the difference in the experience of her son, who's now in middle school, um, who did some of the early years of schooling outside of our school division and really struggled to learn to read, did not see himself as a reader, shared stories of how when he got his birthday cards at his birthday, he wouldn't even try to read them because it made him feel not so great about his skill as a reader. And then upon getting some intervention support, some of it which initially was outside the school division, but then also as we learned more and we developed our intervention program, happened inside our school division, has just really had a powerful impact on how this child sees himself as a learner, sees himself as capable, is less inclined towards, the classic stuff where if a kid struggles to read, they're going to start getting into behavioral, challenges, etc. And it's really making a positive difference. So the more stories that we hear that are like that, the more encouraged we are about the changes that we've made and the changes that we continue to implement. And yeah, it's just been great to have teachers trying out new practices and really digging into that kind of intervention process as well. So yeah, I'd say it's going quite well, and we're really encouraged and looking forward to what the future will bring.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary to go out and make a big change like that before uh before others kind of have. I know from experience here of making big decisions around cell phones, for example, around a more structured approach to classroom management and behavior, that there was just a lot of kind of resistance, and it was like taking on all those tasks really it really involved a lot of people and a lot of thinking. I mean, I'm curious kind of what process you kind of went into to sort of convince people, persuade people. How did that come about to really be a leader in this particular thing?
Well, I think lots of the work from where I sit as superintendent was with principals initially. So talking a lot about some of the challenges that they had when we were using reading recovery. So there was as I said, there were positives in terms of the rigor, but there were also drawbacks in terms of the limitations about what we could achieve. So that was one piece. Another, I think, important leadership, I guess, piece of it would be how do you situate the right people in the right places for the work that you're doing? And so one of the things that I wanted to do, I mentioned our SLP earlier, that's our speech language pathologist. And we had historically worked in a way where like our curriculum and instruction folks and our clinicians and student services folks worked kind of separately. But this was an opportunity, and this was an opportunity to try out something that we had been really deliberate about, which was to blend those two formerly kind of siloed departments, if you like, into one. We could bring the full breadth of our expertise and talent to bear on the challenge of reading. So having our clinicians as well as our curriculum leaders working. I say this like there are a whole bunch of them, but we're a small division, so I'm talking about two or three people here working together on a problem with our principals, and that collaboration was really important. And yeah, I'd say another feature of that was when it came to having a divisional consultant, we conceived of that a bit like a coaching role. And so when we were asking teachers to try new practices, tier one instructional practices, we had somebody who was selected for her capacity to model lessons, to be shoulder to shoulder with teachers, to actually be in the classroom for that kind of job embedded professional learning, if you like. So that made a huge difference too. So those are all features of the levers that I could try to work on from where I am in the organization that I think um, that I think played a big role. I mean, and I don't want to downplay the fact that the shift was challenging for some teachers, and continues to be challenging for teachers, because I think appropriately teachers have a a wise amount of caution about our tendency in education to jump onto the new thing, whatever the new fad is. We're like getting into it and then expecting teachers to change, just like that. And so yeah, so that's been some work too. And the more I think people can see what it looks like in practice, and the more that um, there's data that shows that it's really working for kids, that's ultimately what teachers want to know. Is this going to make things better for the kids that I work with every day? So that's been important too, to have a way to collect data and to work with data in ways that show classroom teachers the gains and the effectiveness of what they're doing.
Absolutely. And do you have any data for us now, or is this kind of are we at a situation where you're collecting that data to kind of show the results?
Well, we've recently been working with Nate Hansford, and I know you know him, and and so he's done a report for us very recently. We just received it very recently that shows statistically significant gains across our schools in the reading instruction and intervention that we've done. So we're really encouraged by that. Um, and we're just now, as we approach the end of this school year, starting to hear back from schools and individual teachers about the gains that we're making, and it's quite positive and reassuring. I think we're safely able to see a connection between the fidelity of our practice with a structured literacy approach and gains made by kids. And so that's also an important thing for us to acknowledge and talk about. So we're excited. We're excited. I have to say it's probably the most exciting change in education that I've been able to participate in my career, honestly. There's nothing more important to us than teaching kids how to read. And I see it, and I've always seen it as being absolutely fundamental to making sure that kids have access to the democratic conversation, if you like. Like I know people talk about reading success from the point of view of how it will help kids scholastically and through their K to 12 trajectory, which of course is true. But I mean, it's absolutely essential that we graduate students who um, have good literacy skill. It allows them to participate in their communities and in our democracy, and that's so important. So,
And let's go to the next question because it perfectly fits in. I'm feeling like you can teach, you can talk about the components of structured literacy, but how are you going to do it? And are you going to do it inefficiently or are you going to do it efficiently? I noticed your district's focus on Rosenshine's principles of instruction, which huge in the UK for some reason, and even though Barack Rosenshine is from the United States, nobody knows about him here. But sort of focusing on an explicit teaching model that, in my view, is the opposite of a buzzword or a pendulum swing, is simply really great teaching that most people would identify with. Yeah, tell me about that decision.
okay, I think for us, maybe there's a bit of a reverse pathway here. We came to understand that Rosenshine's principles really resonated with some work that we'd already begun, and so it was really affirming for us to find this. It's like that sounds like what we've been talking about, and so in our school division, we did some work a few years ago with the support of another superintendent in the province now. Her name's Sandra Herbst, and she was working as a consultant and doing international work, supporting teaching and assessment. And she did some work with us a few years ago where we began working on something that we called My Evergreen Classroom. And we enlisted the support. It's a very collaborative effort of teachers. We even did some work with students and student voice around this to talk about what are our aspirational descriptions of what our classrooms look like when teaching and learning is at its best in our classrooms. And so we have these statements that talk about metacognitive modeling and chunking and so on. And so we've kind of been speaking this language for a while. And then so when we found Rosenshine's work, it was like, hey, this is kind of what we're talking about. I should also say provincially in Manitoba, there was a time, and I guess this was probably in the 1990s, where we had Department of Education documents that were called, Success for All Learners, and we were talking about differentiated instruction. But there were instructional guides that came along with that were really in keeping with some of what we've seen in Rosenshine and in and in other work that you're familiar in, like the walkthrough books that Sherrington and Caviglioli have, and so on. So yeah, so for us, we discovered this Rosenshine. We're like, hey, there's somebody that has put some structure to this, and it really appeals and resonates with us. So yeah.
And what are your thoughts sort of in general around having like an instructional emphasis? Because I can understand the argument from people that you're you're a district or a school division, and there's got to be some parity and there's got to be variety. Maybe every student receives some sort of like a buffet of instructional methods in their trajectory, and it's kind of it's restricting, I guess, the teachers to even talk about what good instruction looks like. I don't agree with what I just said, but I can appreciate, I
Right.
understand that argument. What are your thoughts on having an instructional emphasis?
Yeah, I guess my initial response to that would be like, what else would we be emphasizing as a school division? But I also take your point, and I certainly have that experience. I mean, I was going to say earlier when you were talking about the boldness around making a significant change to reading instruction, for example, that you almost initially have a feeling or a worry about being seen as like a heretic if you're going outside of what the current orthodoxy sort of supports. Um, and I mean, I guess I just think about when it comes to something like Rosenshine, I just think that, or even the phrase direct and explicit instruction, as as I think I even understand you to describe it. There's so much room in there still for lots of student participation, lots of students working together, collaborating, lots of what I would call student voice. And so I think of it as being, when you kind of know what's actually being talked about when we're talking about direct and explicit instruction or Rosenshine's principles, it strikes me that it's not that controversial, or it shouldn't be. Um, but I mean, I should also say, I tell this story sometimes that when we get new teachers coming out of university, and I interview new teachers to come be teachers here in Evergreen, and invariably, and almost to a person, they say, and I think they're coached to say things like this. They'll say to me in an interview something like, well, I don't really think of myself as a teacher. I think of myself more as a guide on the side or a facilitator of learning. And then I sometimes, if I feel that they're comfortable enough for me to say this, I'll say, well, but I posted an ad for a teacher. So, um, and then we kind of go from there. So we've tried to do some work with new teacher orientation and new teacher training to maybe add some thinking to what they come out of universities with, in terms of the word teacher is not a bad word. uh, it's okay to provide direct and explicit instruction to students. In fact, it's often preferable, particularly for novice learners, particularly at the beginning of lessons and beginning of terms, etc. And so these are things that we embrace, and I just think it's important for us to have that emphasis. And in our division plan, I mean, we want it to be true that we're looking both at outcomes and maybe inputs, if those are the right ways to say it. I mean, it sounds a bit mechanical, but to look at student achievement data without also thinking about what teaching practices um, yield that data is missing something. And so we need to be attentive to instruction, and we need to think about, what kinds of practices are really promising, um, and so on. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like now that's around MTSS, because MTSS is become an important framework, and I think I talk about it a lot on this podcast. But it's an important framework here in the United States about talking about intervention, and always we talk about We've got to fix tier one. You can't tier two and tier three out of a tier one problem. And nobody wants to go out on a limb and describe what tier one high quality instruction should look like.
Yeah.
They just want to talk in kind of those vague terms. I think you're on the right path. I'm
Well,
kind of
I
jealous.
yeah, well, I heard you. I think it was in a talk that you had with Gene Tavernetti, maybe, but I think it was in a talk about coaching, and it was like, how challenging is it to try to learn to become a teacher or try to improve as a teacher? Um, I mean, or even maybe more so to achieve system change if you're going to be just agnostic about instruction. And so I think we are we're on a journey to be less agnostic about instruction. Of course, acknowledging, as I said earlier, that I think there's lots of room in Rosenshine's principles and in an appropriate description of explicit and direct instruction for things like student voice, student choice, collaboration, etc. All those things that are important to people, but and also avoiding being too, you don't want to be a zealot about these things, and so you gotta leave some space for people to uh, to do some of their comfort zone stuff. But certainly, I think as a default, we want some clarity around what a good instructional framework is and what practices are more promising than others.
Let's talk about zealotry. It's not on our list of questions, but it's just in my head because recently, like, a prominent professor from Canada kind of had some words around research ed, which I know you guys were visiting, and I've had a lot of people on research ed come on the podcast. I'm just like, what, maybe give me your thoughts on this, because I also want to avoid the path of zealotry, and I want to uh, uh, I don't want to come out dismissing people's ideas, and I don't think I do that, actually, but that is a fear of mine. I mean, how do you walk that line where you're like, we're going to move towards explicit instruction and structured literacy, and however, I value what you have to say, and I'm not making fun of what you've done in the past, or I'm not diminishing your entire life's work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as I said, I just think the more that we learn about what's described as explicit and direct instruction, the more it just sounds to me anyway, and I think others when they give it a chance, to be sort of common sense teaching that that lots of us, independent of the age category we're in, we did experience and see, and it still holds in it lots of the parts of what people might label to be more inquiry based or problem based instruction, discovery learning. It still has the elements of that people really value. And so I think it's in one of those cases, and there are so many right now, right? In education and in society more broadly, where something's presented to us as being this dichotomy or this, like, it's like this binary yes or no, like polarizing thing, and it just isn't that. There's so much more nuance to that when we get into it. And I did see a little bit of the commentary that you're referring to on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, and yeah, I think some of that was a misunderstanding. Some of that too, I think. um, I think maybe the way to say that it is, whenever we get too focused on technique, the technique of teaching, I think that we run the risk of losing sight of a really big picture. And so I think it's important for us when we're talking about instructional practice, particularly when we're talking about it in pretty granular ways and specific ways and somewhat prescribed kind of practices, that we are able to make a connection between um, that teaching practice and a big picture. So I said earlier about reading instruction, and it gets worrisome and when we get too much into a conversation just about phonics, right? And then people are able to throw out the ideas of structured literacy because they think or claim it's all about just phonics. Well, of course, it isn't all about just phonics. And when it is about phonics, it's for a really big picture. It's like if you do not learn to read well, you are at a disadvantage in a democratic society that requires of people the capacity to access big ideas that are sometimes expressed in strategic ways, right? And so there are big picture aims that I think we want to make sure that we can connect our the more technical aspects of what we're talking about to. And so that's a responsibility, I think, on us as leaders. I think it's a responsibility on that falls to researchers as well, right? Like some of the folks that would have been at research ed, like I think they need to be able to make that connection for people so that teachers can see, oh, these aren't folks that don't care about a big picture, and in fact, they're able to reconcile what they're advocating for with a big picture that's appealing to people.
Gosh, it is such a difficult balance. I'll tell you because I will go in guns a blazing around practical stuff. This is how you cold call. This is how you do a turn and talk, right?
Yeah,
And let's just focus in on that technique. Let's forget about everything else. If we can nail this, then while you're teaching, you're not going to have be dealing with your own cognitive load issues. You're going to be focused on what the student responses are, right?
right.
And then I missed out on why and what's going on in the student's head and what's going on with the teacher's lesson plans and overarching purpose of the unit. And then
Mm-hmm.
you zoom out way too much, and it's one of these presentations where you don't come away with anything useful. You're
Yeah,
you're you're really just talking
platitudes.
about teaching,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I heard you speak on an earlier episode of the podcast about you were contrasting what a PD experience is like for you and what it might be like at a research ed event, or I think you were talking to somebody from the UK, and I mean, it really resonated with me. Sometimes you feel like you're in a session, or you're sending your teachers to a session where it's just like they're just going to talk about really big picture challenges and not talk about how the work we do, not just as a school system, but in the classroom, actually can address this challenge. It's one of the reasons that I found what you've been sharing around Project Follow Through to be so compelling. When we're talking about an anti poverty strategy, right? Like the effort to eradicate poverty. And these are teaching practices in the classroom, granular level, that both help kids succeed academically but also socially, also emotionally or psychologically in terms of self-esteem and so on. And so I really do think it behooves us to make those connections for people whenever we can. I mean, even the examples that you talked about, turn and talk. Turn and talk is the foundation of a student's ability to uh, enter into a dialogical space with another citizen about something of importance, right? I mean, this is the most basic foundational parts of democracy, and so um, I just think we need to make those connections for people, and then they will be um, they will feel less like we're missing something. Like there's something you guys and you gals are like forgetting um, about what's going on in the world right now, right? I mean, it's like no, we don't forget. It's like this is part of addressing the big challenges that we have. So
yeah, I think there's something different too about using the purpose to persuade versus trying to inspire.
Right.
trying
Yeah.
to try, and then you're getting into that realm of like of the sort of inspirational guru who's up there, and
Sure.
you guys are the best, and we're all in this, and we're
Sure.
changing the world, and you come away with nothing, nothing
Yeah.
to use.
Yeah. There's a trend for sure out there that I've noticed in the last few years, and I don't know to what extent this was pandemic related or not. I'm not really sure how to find the causality in these things where it's like, the PD speakers that are really um, of appeal to folks or highly sought after often like use what I think it's actually pretty cynical to do this with teachers, but they just turn up and they tell everyone, um, "You're the greatest. Everything's awesome. We're saving the world. Thank you, Winnipeg. Good night." It's like the rock stars coming in, make everyone feel good and go. And it's like, I mean, I want to applaud the work of teachers, of course. Um, but this gets a bit disingenuous and cringy, to borrow a word.
Well, that perfectly fits in for our last question. Leadership, I think, often doesn't include instruction. Instructional leadership, I think, is something that might have, gosh, it seems like there's like it's been sucked out of some corners, mainly because maybe, at least in the United States, principals have too much on their plate. We hire instructional coaches. They're the instructional leaders. The principals really just dealing with parents and behavior and so on. And I see you as a leader when it comes to the instructional leadership space. Um, what are some of the components we should be focusing on when you're leading a district in terms of instructional leadership, and how do they fit together?
Yeah, and it's a good question. I mean, I've tried to scour the environment for support documents that would help with this. We've done some referencing of something called the Ontario Leadership Framework. They're a little bit further ahead in establishing those kind of frameworks than we are in Manitoba, but it talks about the importance of an instructional guidance system. So some of this was connected to our work around My Evergreen Classroom or Rosenshine's principles. Is like you need some reference point, I think, to articulate what you think promising teaching practices are. So that's a component that I think is important. Um, for us, other important pieces have been to actually be in teachers' classrooms, observing what that work looks like. Here in our school division, we've used our province has a provincial report card. And so we report on what they call student learning behaviors separately from curricular outcomes. The whole history of that we could talk about probably for a long time. And so we've used the framework that they provide around learning behaviors as kind of an observation tool in classrooms. And we've noticed a good amount of overlap between what we describe as positive learning behaviors and what are described in some circles as social emotional learning behaviors. And so we observe that in the classroom and we do these walks collaboratively. So sometimes it's principals with me, sometimes we have teachers along with us, and we observe the students and we think about what's happening in the classroom when we see these positive learning behaviors kind of at their best. And so over the course of this past year, this has been a big focus for us this year. Is We've really developed a shared sense of these are some of the features of classrooms and teaching that really seem to go along well with promoting and teaching these positive learning behaviors. And they're the things that we know are effective teaching, right? It's like the clarity that comes from direct and explicit instruction. It's modeling practice. It's metacognitive talk. It's chunking the lesson, breaking it down into parts that are digestible for kids. It's frequent opportunities for kids to practice and you checking in on understanding and providing feedback. It's all of those things that we that we know, and in many ways I feel like, geez, we've known this for a long time, haven't we? And so it's all that stuff. And so those learning walks for us, classroom visitations, have been really good and really positive. We used an appreciative inquiry model, so it was all about talking about what's positive, and it wasn't focused on, picking on anyone and saying, here's the things that a teacher's doing wrong or anything like that. And so that's been a great source of learning for us, and has really, I think, supported principals and provided us with common language across our school division. And then when principals gather now, we have principal meetings that are not um, they're not focused on administrative, administrivia, sometimes people would like to call it. They're an opportunity for principals to debrief their experience doing learning walks, talk about the instructional practices that they've seen, talk about what they see kids doing in classrooms, and think about how those things are all connected. Um, we think about how different parts of our system, you probably have some of these features in your school as well. It's like, teachers have professional growth plans, our principals have professional growth plans, our schools have school improvement plans, our division has a divisional improvement plan. So we talk about how all those things connect and how each informs another. So we're really trying to examine and capitalize on the way those things do and should overlap, and our professional development that goes along with that. So our principal meetings have a professional development focus that includes collaboration, but also includes guests coming in to share ideas and inject some new thinking. So that's been really important. And then coaching is something that we want to explore some more moving forward. We've always, or for a long time, had roles out of the division office that are usually called consultant. And over the years, we've really tried to move toward a model where that consultant actually goes into classrooms. It sounds funny to say it that way now, but actually goes into classroom and works directly with teachers to support them, to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, to provide examples, to provide a model, to learn from them also, because sometimes you want some transferability across classrooms when you see something amazing happening. So those are all parts. Those are all parts for us. But some of it's a mindset too. I mean, you mentioned that maybe this isn't top of mind for all principals in all contexts. And I mean, I can share with you that there was a number of years ago I was working with some principals, and I won't say where, but I remember asking a question that was based on a school plan or a district plan that was around, kind of loosely around instructional practice. And there was a goal kind of articulated about, to what extent teachers are teaching to the diversity in their classrooms. And so, there weren't hard data indicators attached to this goal. So I just asked the question as general as I could. Like, I know there isn't hard data attached to this goal, but from your perception, like, how would you say your teachers are doing on this kind of goal that you have about teaching to the diversity in the classroom? And the principal actually said, like, well, how would I know that? It's something like, how would I know that? Or what business of that is mine? What business uh, of that is mine? And that struck me as really odd. I just thought the principal, the principal teacher in the building should be very interested in instructional practice and in supporting teachers to continue to improve in their work.
Gosh, I mean, yeah, that all of this stuff, all of this really gets me excited. But isn't it funny, right? And I think a lot of parents would think this is surprising to hear if they were listening into this part, that principals might not feel the need to be present in classrooms, or that they are also not receiving a lot of times professional development around instruction, or that they're not even really laser focused in some cases in instruction. As long as the building is running, right, it's almost like you're running a ski resort at that point, right? As long as all the hills are operating, we're successful, right? And of course you need to know what's happening in each of the hills, right? You need to actually be a part of it. It also just connects you the profession and to the students, to you start to understand the concerns of teachers who what does it mean when they say I'm tired or I'm stressed or I'm burned out? What does that actually what does that actually mean? And I just think it's great. I think it's great. I think what you're doing is excellent. Do you have any final things you'd like to share about what you're doing before we close out?
Well, I really appreciate your compliments. And I should also say, I mean, the principals that I work with here daily, I mean, they are committed to making sure that they're instructional leaders, and they are, of course, concerned and interested and passionate about what's happening in classrooms. I think, as I said earlier, sometimes um, we're inclined to focus quite a bit on the student achievement results side of things, like the outputs or outcomes, and not the inputs part, which is like what teacher practice looks like. But more and more our principals are feeling a greater level of comfort and interest in that, and so that's something I think that's really encouraging. I mean, as far as final thoughts go, I mean, I think I would express appreciation for the opportunities that I see now through social media and the networks that are being built by folks like yourself, Zach, where you can kind of see connections to other people that are doing similar work or focusing on similar things. And you're just finding these affirming and sometimes challenging um, positions, and the articulation of a position, or research, or advocacy that really compels us to think deeply about what we're doing in our schools and our classrooms to put our kids in the best stead that we can to do well. So I'm really appreciative for the connections that we've been able to make in that regard, and I hope others are open-minded to it as well. I think we've been through a stretch where we wanted to make sure that we were living up to the promises we make around being inclusive, being really supportive of kids, being really interested in them as people that can make choices, and they come to us with interests and passions. They come to us with certain kinds of knowledge, and all that's true. But there might have been some things that we became less attentive to, and I think we have an opportunity before us to really dig into the ways that our teachers' expertise and their practices can really launch us forward in helping support our kids to do well academically, socially, and into their adult years as citizens, as neighbors, as workers, and so on.
Perfect. And with that, Scott, we're gonna close out. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in once again to Progressively Incorrect. We're coming close up to the end of the season, so I've just been so honored that all of you keep on tuning in and listening on your drive to work or on your way home. Thank you so much, Scott Hill, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Really appreciate it.